He fed a starving bobcat kitten, but what happened years later shocked everyone. It started as a simple act of kindness, one lonely ranch hand, one helpless wild creature, and a stormy night that changed everything. At first, it seemed like a secret he could keep forever, until whispers turned into accusations, and his bond with the animal became the center of a dangerous fight. But the real shock wasn't the bobcat's return, it was the hidden truth no one saw coming. A truth powerful enough to destroy lives and expose a deadly scheme. When loyalty, survival, and betrayal collide, the question isn't just what happened to the bobcat, but what happens when the wild fights back. Will compassion save him more? Put everything he loves at risk? Before we start, take a moment to comment your name or city. It's my way of remembering that behind each play is a real heartbeat. Thunder cracked across the darkening Montana sky as Ryland Cormac's tired shoulders slumped against the steering wheel of his old pickup truck. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the heavy rain, squeaking back and forth as lightning illuminated the lonely dirt road ahead. His muscles ached from 12 straight hours of mending fences and moving hay bales, work that would likely go unnoticed, as usual. The headlights caught something small moving in the drainage ditch beside the road. Ryland squinted through the rain-streaked glass, almost missing it entirely. He could have driven past, like most would on such a miserable night, but something made him stop. Pulling over, he grabbed his flashlight from under the seat. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a tiny, waterlogged form huddled against the earth. A bobcat kitten, no bigger than a house cat, lay trembling in the mud. Its ribs showed through matted fur, and its eyes were glassy with exhaustion. Ryland's breath caught in his throat. He'd grown up hearing his family's warnings about predators, how they were nothing but threats to livestock, how they needed to be kept away at all costs. The ranch's policy was clear. Predators were the enemy. But this wasn't a threat. This was just a baby, starving and alone. "Hey there, little one," he whispered, crouching down slowly. The kitten's eyes followed his movement, but it was too weak to run. Its pitiful state tugged at something deep in Ryland's chest. He knew what it felt like to be overlooked, to struggle without anyone noticing. Using his jacket as a makeshift barrier, he carefully scooped up the trembling creature. It barely protested, only releasing a soft whimper that was nearly lost in the storm. The kitten's heart raced against his palms, but it didn't fight him. Back in his truck, Ryland cradled the bobcat against his chest, cranking up the heater. "I know I probably shouldn't," he murmured, "but I can't leave you out here to die." Drive home to the ranch was tense. Kept the kitten hidden under his jacket, mind racing with where he could safely keep it. The old storage room in the back of the barn, the one nobody ever used, might work. He could make it comfortable there, away from prying eyes. Parking behind the barn to avoid the house's windows, Ryland worked quickly in the rain. He found an old wooden crate and lined it with horse blankets, creating a makeshift den in the storage room's corner. The kitten, when placed inside, immediately huddled into the warmth. "You need food," Ryland realized, studying the creature's bony frame. He hurried to the house, sneaking into the kitchen to grab some leftover chicken from dinner. His older brothers. Loud laughter echoed from the living room. They hadn't even noticed he was late getting home. Back in the barn, Ryland tore the chicken into tiny pieces, offering them one at a time. The bobcat kitten ate cautiously at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Its tiny pink tongue darted out to lick its whiskers, and Ryland felt a smile spread across his face. "What are you doing out here?" The voice made him jump. Leona Hartwell stood in the barn doorway, her auburn hair darkened by rain. She must have come to check on one of the horses. Her father, the local vet, often sent her on evening rounds. Ryland started to hide the crate, but the kitten chose that moment to peek its head out. He froze, waiting for her to lecture him about the dangers of wild animals or threaten to tell his family. Instead, she moved closer, her green eyes softening as she took in the scene. "A bobcat kitten? Where did you find it? In a ditch off Old Miller Road," Ryland explained quietly. "Was half dead. I couldn't just leave it there," Leona finished, kneeling beside him. She studied the kitten with professional interest, then looked at Ryland with something that made his chest warm. Understanding. You did the right thing, everyone else would say I'm crazy or stupid. Rylan ran a hand through his rain-damp hair. They'd tell me to get rid of it. Leona shook her head. Then everyone else would be wrong. She reached out slowly, letting the kitten sniff her fingers. Compassion isn't stupid, Rylan. I've always known you had a good heart, even if others don't see it. Her words hit him hard. In all his 22 years on the ranch, few people had ever really seen him, let alone praised his judgment. Won't tell anyone? No, she promised, helping him arrange the blankets more securely around the crate. I'll bring some proper supplies tomorrow, milk replacer, vitamins. We'll help this little one together. The kitten had finished eating, and was now watching them with bright, alert eyes. It looked better already, its fur beginning to dry in the barn's warmth. Rylan felt something shift inside him, a certainty that, despite what he'd been taught, this was right. Thank you, he said softly to Leona, meaning it for more than just her silence. She smiled, understanding in her eyes. Sometimes the best choices are the ones that go against what we're supposed to do. Trust your instincts, Rylan. They're better than you know. They sat together in the quiet barn, watching the rescued kitten drift off to sleep, while outside the storm continued to rage. For the first time in years, Rylan felt truly seen, not for what others wanted him to be, but for who he really was. The early morning sun hadn't yet crested the mountains when Rylan slipped into the barn, carrying a small bowl of warm milk and leftover chicken scraps. His boots crunched softly on the hay-strewn floor as he made his way to the hidden corner, where he'd created a makeshift nest for the Bobcat Kitten. Hey there, little one, he whispered, kneeling down beside the wooden crate lined with old blankets. The kitten's silver-gray fur caught the dim light filtering through the barn's weathered boards. Its amber eyes, once dull with exhaustion, now showed a spark of life that made Rylan's heart swell. You're looking better today. He set down the bowl, watching as the kitten cautiously approached the food. I think I'll call you Ashen, he said softly, on account of your color. Over the next few days, Rylan fell into a careful routine. He'd wake before dawn, tend to Ashen, then rush. Through his regular ranch duties, during lunch breaks, he'd hurry back to check on the kitten, always glancing over his shoulder to ensure. No one followed him to the barn. Ashen grew stronger with each passing day. The once fragile creature began to show playful bursts of energy. Pouncing on pieces of string, Rylan would dangle and practicing wobbly stalking movements around the crate. But with the kitten's increasing strength came greater risk of discovery. One afternoon, while Rylan was mucking out stalls, he overheard two ranch hands talking outside the barn. Heard the Petersons lost 3 sheep last week, one said. Something's been prowling these parts. This wouldn't surprise me none, the other replied. Been seeing tracks up near the creek.
Eye lines.
Hands tightened on his pitchfork. He knew Ashen was too small to be responsible. Fear was spreading through the valley like wildfire. That weekend, the community gathered at the town hall for their monthly meeting. The usual discussions about irrigation rights and fence line. Disputes were overshadowed by whispered conversations about predator sightings. Rylan stood at the back of the room, trying to make himself invisible as always. Then Silas Drexton stepped forward, his expensive boots clicking against the wooden floor. The wealthy land developer commanded attention in his crisp ranch, wearing perfectly styled silver hair. He cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. Friends and neighbors, Silas began, his voice carrying easily to every corner. I've heard your concerns about the predator situation, and I share them. He paused, making eye contact with various members of the crowd. These wild animals are more than just a nuisance. They're a threat to our way of life, to our livestock, to our children. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Rylan felt his jaw clench. The current laws, Silas continued, tie our hands. We're forced to wait, to watch our animals get picked off one by one while bureaucrats debate protection status. He shook his head solemnly. I say it's time we take action. We need to change. These laws allow immediate extermination of any predator that threatens our community. More people nodded now, their faces hardening with resolve. Rylan wanted to speak up to point out that most predators avoided human settlements, that they played a vital role in the ecosystem. But the words stuck in his throat. He'd never been good at speaking in front of others, and these people had. Known him since he was a boy, the quiet ranch hand who kept to himself. From across the room, Leona Hartwell caught his eye. The veterinarian's daughter stood with her arms crossed, her expression matching the defiance Ryland felt, burning in his chest. She gave him a subtle nod, as if she could read his thoughts. Silas was still speaking, his words weaving a tapestry of fear and false security, of already drafted proposals for new ordinances. With your support, we can protect what's ours. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. After all, what's more important than the safety of our community? The meeting ended with enthusiastic applause for Silas's speech. As people filed out, Ryland overheard snippets of conversation expressing relief that someone was finally taking charge of the situation. His thoughts turned to Ashen, alone in the barn, and his heart raced with worry. Oh, they're scared. A soft voice said beside him. Ryland turned to find Leona standing there, her eyes full of understanding. And Silas knows exactly how to use that fear. Ryland nodded, unable to find the right words. But Leona seemed to understand anyway, offering him a sympathetic smile before following her father out into the evening air. That night, as Ryland made his final check on Ashen, he watched the kitten playfully, batted his fingers through the slats of the crate. The creature that had arrived at death's door was now full of life and trust. Looking into those bright amber eyes, Ryland knew he'd made the right choice that stormy night, regardless of what Silas, Drexton, or anyone else might say about predators. But as he left the barn, he double-checked the lock on the door, knowing that his small act of compassion was now more dangerous than ever. Silas's words at the meeting had planted seeds of fear throughout the community, and Ryland couldn't shake the feeling that the wealthy developer's concern for public safety masked darker motivations. The early morning sun hadn't yet crested the mountains when Ryland slipped into the barn, carrying a small bowl of warm milk and leftover chicken scraps. His boots crunched softly on the hay-strewn floor. As he made his way to the hidden corner where he'd created a makeshift nest for Ashen, "Here you go, buddy," he whispered. Setting down the bowl, Ashen was no longer the fragile kitten he'd found in the ditch. 2 months of careful feeding and shelter had transformed him into a sleek young bobcat, his silver-gray coat gleaming with health. He moved with the fluid grace of a born predator, though his eyes held a surprising gentleness when they met. Ryland's pride swelled in Ryland's chest as he watched Ashen eat. The bobcat's recovery felt like his own secret victory, a reminder that kindness could flourish even in harsh places. Every morning and evening, he'd snuck food and care to his wild friend, building a bond of trust that defied conventional wisdom. But that morning, everything changed. The barn door creaked open unexpectedly. Ryland's heart stopped as Jake Miller, one of the older ranch hands, stepped inside. Ashen darted behind some hay bales, but not before Jake caught a clear glimpse of silver fur and wild eyes. What in heaven's name? Jake stumbled backward, his weathered face pale with shock. Was that a bobcat? Jake? I can explain, Ryland started, but the older man was already backing away, shaking his head. Boy, have you lost your mind? Keeping a wild predator right here on the ranch. Word spread through the valley like wildfire. By noon, it seemed everyone knew about Ryland's secret. Whispers followed him across the ranch yard. Workers gave him a wide berth, their faces showing a mixture of fear and disapproval. The situation came to a head that afternoon when Silas Drexton's black truck rolled up the driveway. Silas stepped out, his expensive boots crunching on gravel, his presence commanding attention, as always. A small crowd gathered, drawn by the tension in the air. I heard about your little pet project, Ryland, Silas said, his voice carrying across the yard. I have to say, I'm disappointed. Actually, I'm alarmed. We're all alarmed. Ryland stood his ground, though his hands trembled slightly. He's never hurt anyone or anything. Not yet, Silas countered, his voice taking on a theatrical concern. But we're talking about a wild predator. What happens when it gets hungry? When it decides our cattle look like easy prey? Or worse, what about the children who play in these fields? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered crowd. Ryland saw faces he'd known all his life now, looking at him with suspicion and doubt. I raised him, Ryland protested. He trusts me. Not dangerous. It's exactly the kind of naive thinking that puts everyone at risk, Silas declared. This is why we need those new ordinances I've been pushing for. We're to protect us from well-meaning but reckless decisions that endanger our whole community. The crowd's nodding heads made Ryland's stomach sink. His quiet life of hard work and simple respect was crumbling around him. Everything he'd built, his reputation, his place in the community, was being questioned because of one act of compassion. Later that afternoon, as Ryland sat on a fence rail, feeling more alone than ever, Leona Hartwell approached. Kicked up small clouds of dust as she walked, her face set with determination. "Don't you dare give up," she said, leaning against the fence beside him. "But you did. Saving that kitten, caring for it, that wasn't wrong. That was humanity." At its best, Ryland glanced at her, grateful for the support, but weighted down by doubt. Maybe they're right. Maybe I was foolish. "No," Leona said firmly. "Your instincts were right. Silas talks about protection, but all he really wants is control. Don't let him make you doubt yourself." Her words sparked a small flame of defiance in Ryland's chest. He might have lost his neighbor's trust, but he hadn't lost his conviction. Somewhere in the barn, Ashen was proof that compassion could bridge even the wildest divides. The sun was setting now, painting the Montana sky in fierce oranges and purples. Ryland knew his life had changed irrevocably. His secret was out, and Silas had successfully turned the community against him. But with Leona's steadfast support and his own quiet certainty, he found the strength to face whatever came next. The morning dew still clung to the grass as Leona Hartwell walked purposefully toward the town hall. Her boots left wet prints on the wooden steps as she climbed to the entrance, clutching a thick folder of documents to her chest. Inside, voices echoed off the walls as townspeople gathered for what had become a weekly ritual: Silas Drexton's community safety meetings. "The situation is becoming dire," Silas announced from behind the podium. His expensive suit a stark contrast to the worn jackets and work clothes of the ranchers. 3 more cattle lost this week alone. The predator problem is out of control. Leona slipped into a seat near the back, watching as Silas gestured dramatically at a map covered in red pins. Each one supposedly marked an attack, but something about the pattern bothered her. As a veterinarian's daughter who had grown up treating local livestock, she knew predator behavior. These attacks didn't fit natural patterns. We need expanded hunting rights, Silas continued, his voice carrying authority. "The current restrictions are putting our livelihoods at risk. Who here hasn't lost stock to these beasts?" Several hands raised, but Leona noticed they were mostly Silas's own ranch hands. She'd been investigating the reports quietly over the past weeks, and the numbers didn't add up. Predator populations were disappearing far too quickly for natural causes or legal hunting to explain. In the third row, Ryland sat with his shoulders tense, his face carefully neutral. Since the whispers about Ashen had started, he'd become even quieter than usual, trying to avoid drawing attention. But Leona could see the conflict in his eyes every time Silas spoke about eliminating predators. After the meeting, Leona caught up with Ryland outside. "Something's not right," she said in a low voice. "I've been checking the reports. The timing, the locations, it doesn't make sense." Ryland glanced around nervously before responding. "What do you mean, look at this?" She opened her folder, showing him a hand-drawn map. "These are the actual predator territories we've tracked over the years. But Silas's attacks don't match up. It's like the predators are appearing exactly where he needs them to be to make his point." "You think he's lying about the attacks?" "Worse." Leona lowered her voice further. "I think he's orchestrating them. Yesterday I found these hidden behind his ranch office." She pulled out several photographs showing dead bobcats and wolves, clearly killed by gunshot wounds. The dates on these, they're from before the hunting season even started. And look at the locations. Ryland studied the photos, his face growing pale. "These are from protected areas." "Yes. This would be illegal, exactly." He's not just waiting for attacks to happen, he's creating the problem he claims to be solving. Leona's eyes flashed with anger. And now he's using it to push for changes that would give him even more control over the valley. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on Ryland. He thought of Ashen, growing stronger each day, yet still vulnerable to men like Silas. The Bobcat had become more than just a secret. He was living proof that coexistence was possible, that compassion didn't make you weak. "What can we do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need more evidence," Leona replied. "Solid proof that connects these killings directly to Silas, but I can't do it alone." The unspoken question hung between them. Rylan knew that. Helping her would mean stepping out of the shadows, potentially exposing not just himself, but also Ashen to Silas's wrath. His entire life he'd avoided conflict, done what was expected, stayed invisible. But as he thought of Ashen's trust, the way the Bobcat looked at him with those amber eyes full of intelligence and loyalty, he realized neutrality was no longer an option. "Tell me what you need," he said finally, straightening his shoulders. Over. The next week, they worked carefully, documenting discrepancies in Silas's reports, photographing evidence of illegal hunting activities. Leona discovered shipping records showing purchases of specialized hunting equipment during off-seasons. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of Silas's true activities. The breakthrough came when they found a hidden wind clearing deep in Silas's property. Scattered shell casings matched the wounds and the dead predators from the photographs. Nearby, they discovered logs detailing organized hunts, dates, locations, and even payments made to participants. It was a systematic operation designed to create the very crisis Silas claimed to be fighting against. "This is it," Leona whispered, carefully photographing the evidence. "This proves everything." As they prepared to leave, voices echoed through the trees. Silas's men were approaching. Rylan and Leona quickly gathered their evidence, hearts pounding as they slipped away just before being discovered. The weight of what they'd uncovered pressed heavily on both of them, knowing that exposing Silas would change everything in the valley and in their own lives. The night air crackled with an unnatural orange glow. Rylan jolted awake to the acrid smell of smoke seeping under his bedroom door. His heart hammered against his ribs as he threw off his covers and rushed to the window. The family barn was engulfed in flames, angry tongues of fire licking up its weathered walls. "Fire," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. As he sprinted down the hallway, banging on doors, a terrifying thought struck him. His 12-year-old brother Tommy often snuck out to the barn at night to play with the new kittens. Rylan burst out of the house, bare feet pounding against the cold ground. The heat from the inferno hit him like a wall. "Tommy!" he screamed, scanning the yard. No response. It's just the roar of flames and the distant sound of splitting timber. Through the smoke, he caught glimpses of dark figures retreating into the shadows. His blood ran cold as he recognized the distinctive walk of one of Silas's men. But there was no time to dwell on that now. "Tommy?" he called again, his voice growing hoarse. Then he heard a faint cry from inside the barn. Without hesitation, Rylan charged toward the burning building. The heat was unbearable, singeing his hair and burning his lungs. Smoke stung his eyes as he navigated through the familiar space, now transformed into a maze of fire and shadow. "Rylan." Tommy's terrified voice came from the hayloft. "I'm stuck." Scrambled up the ladder, ignoring the searing heat of the metal rungs against his palms. Tommy was trapped beneath a fallen beam, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on his face. "Hold on, buddy," Rylan grunted, straining against the heavy wood, but it wouldn't budge. The smoke was getting thicker. He could hear the structure groaning ominously above them. Suddenly, a familiar gray blur shot through the flames. Ashen appeared beside them, his amber eyes glowing in the firelight. The Bobcat's powerful muscles tensed as he positioned himself next to Rylan, both of them pushing against the beam. With their combined strength, the wood shifted just enough for Tommy to wiggle free. But as Rylan turned to lead them to safety, he saw their escape route was blocked by falling debris. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the gaps in the burning walls, they could see Silas's men returning, probably to ensure their dirty work was complete. But they hadn't counted on Ashen. The Bobcat launched himself through a broken board, becoming a fury of claws and snarls. The men scattered in terror as Ashen's sharp claws found their mark, ripping through jackets and drawing blood. Their shouts, of panic filled the night air as they stumbled over each other in their rush to escape. "Go!" Ryland shouted to Tommy, pointing to a small opening near the ground. He helped his brother squeeze through first, then followed, Ashen providing cover with his fierce defense. They collapsed in the yard, coughing and gasping for clean air. Their parents and ranch hands had formed a bucket brigade, but it was clear the barn couldn't be saved. As the flames reached their peak, the structure groaned one final time before collapsing in on itself in a shower of sparks. Ashen padded back to them, his silver-gray fur covered in soot but otherwise unharmed. He pressed his head against Ryland's shoulder, a gesture of reassurance they'd both survived. Tommy, still trembling, reached out to stroke the bobcat's fur. "You saved us," the boy whispered in awe. "Both of you." Other ranchers had arrived to help fight the fire, and Ryland noticed their shocked expressions as they watched Ashen gently nuzzle Tommy's hand. This wasn't the dangerous predator Silas had warned them about. This was a protector, a guardian, who'd risked his own life to save two human boys. Their mother rushed over, wrapping them both in a fierce embrace. "My boys," she sobbed, then froze as she noticed Ashen. But the bobcat merely sat calmly beside them, his presence a stark contrast to the chaos around them. "That's the bobcat everyone's been talking about?" one of the neighboring ranchers asked, stepping closer. "The one Silas said was threatening our livestock." Ryland nodded, his throat too raw from smoke to speak, but he didn't need to. The truth was clear to everyone who had witnessed Ashen's actions. The bobcat's loyalty had saved not just Ryland and Tommy's lives, but had also exposed the lie at the heart of Silas's fear-mongering campaign. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten, the remaining flames were finally brought under control. The barn was a total loss, but something else had been gained that night, a growing understanding that perhaps they had been wrong about what, and who they should truly fear. The morning after the fire, Ryland stood in the charred remains of the barn, his boots crunching on ash-covered ground. The acrid smell of smoke still hung heavy in the air. Tommy had been lucky, just a sprained ankle and some minor burns. But the close call left Ryland shaking with a mixture of fury and determination. "We can't let him get away with this," Leona said softly, stepping carefully through the debris. Her usually bright eyes were dark with concern as she surveyed the destruction. "This isn't just about Ashen anymore." Ryland nodded, running his hand along a blackened beam. "No, but how do we prove it was Silas?" "I think I might have something," Leona replied, pulling out her phone. "I've been tracking unusual wildlife patterns across the valley. First, it was just the predators disappearing. But now, even the deer and elk are leaving certain areas. It doesn't make sense unless someone's forcing them out." He spent the next 3 days investigating, driving through remote parts of the valley in Leona's old pickup truck. Ryland noticed how the vegetation seemed sickly in some areas. The usual vibrant green dulled to a sallow yellow. They collected water samples from various streams, storing them carefully in glass vials. On the 4th day, Leona burst into the temporary shelter where Ryland was feeding Ashen. Her face was flushed with excitement and anger. "The lab results came back," she said, waving a stack of papers. "The water's contaminated with industrial chemicals, the kind used in construction sites. They're poisoning the streams to drive the wildlife away." Ryland's stomach turned as he examined the report. The numbers were clear: dangerous levels of toxins in multiple water sources, all connecting to areas where Silas had been pushing for development rights. "Look at this," Leona continued, spreading out a map on a wooden crate. She pointed to several marked locations. "These are all places where Silas has filed permits for luxury lodges." And here she traced her finger along blue lines. "These are the contaminated waterways. They match perfectly." The scope of Silas's plan began to dawn on Ryland. This wasn't just about hunting rights or predator control. It was about systematically destroying the ecosystem to make way for development. The wildlife wasn't just being driven out. Were being poisoned out of their own habitat. "He's killing everything," Ryland said quietly, watching Ashen lap at his water bowl. "Not just the predators, the whole valley." They spent hours poring over documents Leona had gathered. Property records showed Silas buying up land at suspiciously low prices after wildlife problems forced owners to sell. environmental impact. Reports had been doctored. Water quality tests had been buried. "This is bigger than we thought," Leona said, her voice trembling with anger. "He's not just trying to control the hunting laws, he's trying to turn the entire valley into a playground for the rich." Rylan walked to the makeshift window, staring out at the mountains that had been his home his entire life. The same peaks his grandfather had gazed upon while building their ranch. The same valleys where generations of wildlife had roamed free. "What are we going to do?" Leona asked, coming to stand beside him. For the first time in his life, Rylan felt the weight of choice pressing down on him. He could stay quiet, protect himself and his family, maybe even take Silas's offer to buy their land. Or he could fight not just for Ashen now, but for everything and everyone he'd ever known. "We have to stop him," Rylan said finally, his voice firm. "We have to show everyone what he's really doing." Leona squeezed his arm. "It won't be easy. Silas has money, influence, connections." "And we have the truth," Rylan replied, watching as Ashen padded silently across the floor to rub against his legs. The bobcat had grown strong and healthy under his care, defying all expectations. Maybe it was time for Rylan to do the same. They spent the rest of the day organizing their evidence, water test results, property records, wildlife reports, photographs of contaminated streams. Each piece told part of a larger story of corruption and destruction. The truth was there, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be revealed as the sun began to set. Casting long shadows across the valley, Rylan made his decision. He couldn't hide anymore. The time had come to stand up, to speak out, to fight for something bigger than himself. The attack on his family's barn had only strengthened his resolve. Now, with proof of Silas's true plans in hand, he knew what he had to do. The quiet ranch hand who had always stayed in the background was about to step into the light. The valley's survival depended on it. "Can't let him get away with this," Leona said softly, stepping carefully through the debris. Her usually bright eyes were dark with concern as she surveyed the destruction. "There has to be more evidence of what he's doing." Rylan nodded, his jaw set with determination. The memory of Tommy trapped in the flames had changed something in him. He couldn't stay quiet anymore, not when lives were at stake. Ashen emerged from the shadows of the burned timbers, padding silently to Rylan's side. The bobcat's silver-gray fur was dusted with ash, but his amber eyes remained alert and watchful. "Ashen can help us track," Rylan said, his voice stronger than usual. "He knows these lands better than any of us." Leona pulled out a detailed map of the valley from her satchel, spreading it across a charred beam. "The water testing kits from my father's clinic showed traces of chemicals in these streams." She pointed to several locations marked in red. "But we need solid proof of Silas's involvement." For the next week, they worked tirelessly. Before dawn, Rylan would complete his ranch duties, then join Leona and Ashen in their investigation. The bobcat's keen senses led them to disturbed areas where containers had been dragged through brush, leaving behind traces of toxic substances. "Look at this," Leona said one afternoon, holding up an empty container with Silas's development company. Logo, he's not even trying to hide it anymore. Thinks he's untouchable. Word began to spread. Old Jim Parker, whose ranch bordered the eastern stream, was the first to come around. He'd lost 3 cattle to mysterious illnesses, and the evidence Rylan and Leona presented made too much sense to ignore. "Never thought I'd say this," Jim admitted. His weathered face creased with concern, "but that bobcat of yours might be the best thing that's happened to this valley. Shows what we've been missing while we were busy being afraid." More ranchers began to listen. Sarah Martinez, whose family had worked these lands for 4 generations, brought water samples from her property. The Hendersons, initially skeptical, changed their minds after finding dead fish in their creek. Each new ally brought another piece of the puzzle, forming a clearer picture of Silas's systematic destruction. Rylan found himself at the center of these gatherings, though he spoke little. Instead, he listened, nodded, and showed rather than told. When questions arose about predator behavior, he demonstrated through Ashen how trust and respect could bridge seemingly impossible divides. The bobcat's presence, once controversial, became a symbol of resistance against Silas's manipulation. One evening, as a group of ranchers gathered in the Cormac's kitchen, Leona watched Rylan with pride. He moved quietly among them, sharing evidence, answering questions with careful consideration. Though he never raised his voice or demanded attention, people naturally turned to him, drawn by his steady conviction. "You've got more courage than most," she told him later, as they reviewed their findings. "Standing up for what's right, even when it would have been easier to stay invisible." Rylan glanced at Ashen, who lay contentedly nearby. "Sometimes the right path finds you," he said. Softly, "You just have to be brave enough to follow it." The alliance grew stronger. Marcus Thompson, the town council member who had initially supported Silas's proposals, approached Rylan after seeing the evidence. "We need to make this public," he declared. "The whole valley needs to know what's really happening." Through it all, Ashen remained by Rylan's side, a living testament to the power of trust and compassion. The Bobcat's presence at community meetings, once unthinkable, became normal. Children would point in wonder, and parents, instead of pulling them away in fear, would explain how Ashen had helped save Tommy from the fire. The transformation wasn't just in the community. Rylan himself began to stand taller, speak more confidently. His usual silence gave way to purposeful action. When questions needed answering, people looked to him. When decisions needed making, they sought his opinion. Not because he demanded authority, but because he had earned their trust through consistent, principled action. "You've started something bigger than yourself," Leona told him one evening. As they watched the sunset paint the valley in gold, people are remembering what it means to stand together. Rylan scratched behind Ashen's ears, earning a contented purr from the powerful creature. "We all just needed a reminder," he said, "that some things are worth fighting for." The growing alliance marked a turning point in the valley's struggle against Silas's influence. What had begun as one boy's act of compassion toward a wounded Bobcat had evolved into a community's awakening to their own strength and values. Though challenges still lay ahead, they would face them together. With Rylan's quiet courage lighting the way, the morning dawned crisp and clear as Rylan and his allies gathered outside the town hall. Their evidence was organized meticulously, in folders, water samples, photographs, soil tests, and signed testimonies from affected ranchers. Leona stood beside him, her presence steady and reassuring. "We've got this," she whispered, squeezing his arm. "The truth is on our side." Inside, they found Silas with his team of lawyers and several county officials. His usual smooth smile faltered slightly at the sight of the united group filing in. Rylan laid out their findings methodically, his quiet voice gaining strength. As he spoke, his water samples showed toxic levels of industrial chemicals, he explained, spreading photographs across the table. "Here's proof of deliberate dumping in protected watersheds. These are the dead livestock, 27 animals lost in 3 months. The officials leaned forward, examining the evidence with growing concern. Sheriff Matthews's weathered face darkened as he studied the documentation of illegal hunting and the suspicious fires. "This is serious, Mr. Drexton," the sheriff said, turning to Silas. "Very serious indeed." For a moment, victory seemed within reach. Silas's composed facade cracked, revealing a flash of rage beneath. But then his smile returned, cold and calculating. "These are quite dramatic accusations," he said smoothly. "Need time to review them with my legal team, of course? Though I must say, it's rich being accused of environmental crimes by someone harboring a dangerous predator." The meeting concluded with promises of investigation and follow-up. Left the town hall, Leona was optimistic, but Rylan felt uneasy. He'd seen something in Silas's eyes that worried him. 3 days later, Rylan was checking fence lines in the far northern pasture. The autumn air was turning sharp, carrying winter's first whispers. He'd just dismounted to fix a loose wire when he heard vehicles approaching. 3 black trucks appeared, cutting off his escape routes. Silas stepped out of the lead vehicle, followed by 6 men Rylan had never seen before. "You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" Silas said, his voice carrying across the empty field. "Had to play the hero." The men moved with practiced efficiency, surrounding Rylan before he could react. The first blow caught him in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. He fought back, landing a solid punch that bloodied one attacker's nose. But they overwhelmed him with sheer numbers. Fists and boots rained down. Ryland felt ribs crack, tasted blood. Through the haze of pain, he heard Silas speaking. Personal, boy, just business. The valley's changing, whether you like it or not. They left him crumpled in the dirt, barely conscious. His horse had bolted during the attack. The truck's engines faded into distance, leaving him alone in the vast wilderness. Pain blazed through every breath. His right eye was swollen shut, and he could feel blood trickling from his nose and split lip. When he tried to stand, his legs buckled, sending fresh agony through his battered body. Night was approaching. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and he was at least 5 miles from the nearest help. Each movement was torture, but staying still meant freezing. Ryland began crawling, using fence posts to pull himself forward. His thoughts grew darker with each agonizing inch. Had his stand against Silas really accomplished? For Ashen, his fight for principle, it had all led here. This broken moment in the dirt, the stars emerged, cold and distant. His body shivered uncontrollably, torn between fever and freezing. The pain became a fog, making it harder to think. To remember why he'd chosen this path, he collapsed against a fence post, his strength finally giving out. The wilderness stretched endless around him, indifferent to his suffering. In this darkest moment, doubt crept in like frost. Maybe Silas was right. Maybe fighting change was futile. Maybe compassion was a luxury this harsh world couldn't afford. Blood dripped from his lips onto the frozen ground. Each breath was fire in his chest. Alone in the gathering dark, Ryland faced the cost of his choices. Wondering if the price had been too high, the bitter Montana night descended like a shroud. Ryland's breaths came in ragged gasps, each one sending spikes of pain through his broken ribs. His fingers had gone numb from the cold, and consciousness flickered like a guttering flame. A soft sound cut through his haze of pain, the padding of careful paws on frozen ground. Through his one good eye, Ryland made out a familiar silver-gray shape, materializing from the darkness. Ashen approached cautiously, amber eyes glowing in the starlight. "Hey there, friend," Ryland whispered through split lips. The young bobcat circled him once, assessing, before settling against his side. The warmth of the animal's body helped fight back the deadly chill. Ashen's rough tongue gently licked Ryland's bloodied face, a gesture so tender it brought tears to his eyes. "You should go," Ryland mumbled. "Save yourself." But Ashen only pressed, closer, purring deep in his chest. The sound vibrated through Ryland's battered body, somehow making the pain more bearable. He buried his fingers in the bobcat's thick fur, drawing strength from the creature he'd once saved. The bond between them, forged through secret feedings and midnight vigils, had grown into something profound. Ashen wasn't just some wild animal anymore. He was living proof that compassion could flourish even in the harshest circumstances. With Ashen's help, Ryland found the will to move. Every inch was agony, but the bobcat stayed beside him, offering support when he stumbled. When Ryland's strength failed, Ashen would nose at him, refusing to let him give up. It took hours to cover the distance that should have taken minutes. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached the ranch road. Ashen's ears suddenly pricked forward. Ryland heard the sound of approaching vehicles. Silas's black trucks appeared through the morning mist. They slowed at the sight of Ryland standing in the road, Ashen at his side. The lead truck's door opened, and Silas stepped out, looking annoyed but not surprised. "Still alive?" Silas called out. "You're more stubborn than I gave you credit for." He gestured to his men. "Fix that." 2 men advanced but hesitated at Ashen's low growl. The bobcat's muscles were coiled tight, ready to spring. "What's wrong?" "Silas," Ryland's voice was rough but steady. "Afraid to face the truth about what you've done to this valley." "Truth," Silas laughed. "Truth is whatever people believe, and they believe what I tell them to believe." He pulled out a pistol. "But you won't be telling anyone anything." The gun raised. Time seemed to slow. But before Silas could fire, Ashen launched himself through the air with explosive force. His claws raked Silas's gun arm, sending the weapon spinning away. The Bobcat's attack was swift and precise. Not killing, but driving Silas back in panic. Silas's men scattered as Ashen turned his attention to them, fangs bared. In their chaos, they didn't notice the approaching sheriff's vehicles until it was too late. Leona had rallied help through the night, and now justice had arrived. Silas, bleeding from Ashan's claws, tried to flee. He ran blindly in the pre-dawn light, straight toward the ravine that cut through the eastern pasture. A loose stone turned under his foot, and with a cry of surprise, he tumbled over the edge. The fall wasn't fatal, but it left him trapped and injured at the bottom of the steep-sided gully. Sheriff Matthews and his deputies had no trouble taking him into custody. The evidence of his crimes, the poisoned streams, the illegal hunting, the assault on Rylan, would finally see the light of day. Leona rushed to help Rylan, who was swaying on his feet. "You need a hospital," she insisted, supporting his weight. Rylan nodded, too exhausted to argue. But his eyes sought out Ashen, who stood watching from a small distance. The Bobcat's work was done. He'd repaid his debt of compassion in full measure. "You," Rylan said softly to his friend. He understood that this was goodbye. Ashen belonged to the wild, and their paths had to part. The Bobcat held his gaze for a long moment, amber eyes full of intelligence and something like affection. Then he turned and loped away into the brightening dawn, disappearing into the wilderness. That was his true home. Rylan watched him go, feeling not loss but gratitude. Their unlikely friendship had changed them both, proving that sometimes the greatest strength comes from choosing kindness over fear. Sheriff Matthews approached, looking grim but respectful. "We'll need your statement when you're up to it. First, let's get you some medical attention." As they helped him toward the waiting ambulance, Rylan could hear Silas cursing and threatening from the ravine below. But the developer's words had lost their power. The truth was out, and the valley would be protected. The morning after Silas's arrest dawned clear and bright over Montana's rolling hills. Rylan sat on the front porch of his family's ranch house, a cup of steaming coffee warming his bandaged hands. His body still ached from the beating. But each day brought a little more healing. News of Silas's arrest had spread like wildfire through the valley. What surprised Rylan most wasn't the developer's downfall, but how his own quiet reputation had transformed. Ranchers who'd barely noticed him before now stopped by regularly, bringing food and offering help with repairs. His father, usually stern and distant, had clapped him on the shoulder with pride shining in his eyes. "You showed real courage, son," his father had said. "Not just in standing up to Silas, but in seeing good where others saw only danger." Leona's truck pulled up the dusty driveway, and Rylan's heart lifted at the sight of her. She'd been his. Rock through everything, believing in him when doubt clouded his mind. She carried a medical bag. Though they both knew these daily checkups had become more about spending time together than treating his injuries. "How's my favorite patient?" she asked, settling beside him on the porch steps. "Better every day," Rylan replied, carefully stretching his healing ribs. "The sheriff called this morning. Silas is facing 20 years for environmental crimes, assault, and attempted murder. His investors are cooperating with the investigation." Leona took his hand, her touch gentle around the bruises. "You change things here, Rylan. People see that now we change things," he corrected. "I couldn't have done any of it without you." A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Their partnership during the crisis had grown into something deeper, more permanent. Rylan could see their future stretching out before them, shared mornings like this. Building a life together, protecting the valley they both loved. Movement at the tree line caught their attention. Ashen emerged from the shadows, his silver gray coat gleaming in the morning sun. The Bobcat had grown powerful and magnificent, nothing like the half-dead kitten Rylan had rescued so long ago. He padded across the yard with fluid grace, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. Rylan's throat tightened. He'd known this moment was coming, had seen the increasing wildness in Ashen's amber eyes. The bobcat had stayed close through his recovery, but nature was calling him home. "He needs to go," Leona said softly, understanding. In her voice, "He's done what he came to do." Rylan nodded, slowly standing. His injuries protested, but he needed to do this properly. He descended the steps and knelt before his friend, meeting those intelligent eyes one last time. "Thank you," he whispered, reaching out to touch the thick fur. Ashen allowed the contact, leaning briefly into his hand. "You saved more than just my life. You showed me who I could be." The bobcats perumbled through the morning air, a sound that had become so familiar over their months together. Then Ashen stepped back, his muscles bunching as he prepared to leave. "Wait!" Leona called, disappearing into the house. She returned with her camera. One last picture? To remember? Rylan stayed kneeling beside Ashen as Leona captured the moment. Boy and bobcat, their unlikely friendship preserved forever. The camera clicked, and Ashen turned toward the forest. At the tree line, the bobcat paused. He looked back one final time, his powerful form silhouetted against the morning sun. In that moment, Rylan saw both the fragile kitten he'd saved and the magnificent predator who'd saved him in return.
House.
Their eyes met across the distance, acknowledging a bond that would transcend their separation. Then Ashen melted into the forest, disappearing into the wild where he belonged. Rylan felt Leona's hand on his shoulder, anchoring him as emotion threatened to overwhelm him. "He'll be all right," she assured him. "They've started rebuilding the local bobcat population. He'll find his place." "I know," Rylan said, standing slowly. "He taught me that sometimes the bravest thing isn't holding on, it's knowing when to let go." They walked back to the porch together, where the valley spread out before them in all its morning glory. The land was healing, like Rylan himself. Silas's poison was being cleaned from the streams and wildlife was gradually returning. The community had come together, stronger for having faced down corruption with unity and courage. Rylan was no longer the invisible ranch hand, the quiet boy others overlooked. He had found his voice, his strength, and most importantly, his place. Beside him, Leona squeezed his hand, a promise of partnership that would last far beyond this morning. In the distance, a bobcat's cry echoed across the valley, wild and free, yet carrying the memory of a bond that would never truly break. Rylan smiled, knowing that some part of him would always run wild with Ashen through these mountains, while his future stretched out before him, as boundless as the Montana. Sky, if this story found you at the right moment, subscribe and stay close. Tomorrow's may be the reminder you didn't know you needed.